The National Student Financial Aid Scheme is pleading with landlords and not to evict students while it works on resolving payments. NSFAS says a bulk payment of accommodation allowances was processed in May and June after landlords allegedly locked out beneficiaries. They're now requesting landlords who are owed money to submit correspondence regarding outstanding payments. For more on this, we're now joined by NSFAS Administrator Freeman Nomvalo. Freeman, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Hugo.
So obviously I suppose the first port of call is that you're having to deal with this hot potato. There are many issues that you've had to deal with since you started managing or administering NSFAS. And one of the issues that we're faced with right now is that landlords are kicking out students from their various residences. What is this current situation on the ground? How many students are affected?
I think the number of students affected has reduced significantly. I don't have the exact numbers at all. But we were getting calls from almost every institution across the country where students were facing eviction, and we made the payments in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. We are still making a call to accommodation providers who may still have not submitted the information to submit, and make sure that we are able to process those.
So, where was the ball dropped, or how did this challenge arise? Because the expectation is that the service providers would be paid promptly in order to avert the situation that currently exists.
I think the big part of it is the instability in the organization, which then leads people reluctant to make decisions, reluctant to take the actions that they need to take, but also the flow of information between ourselves and the institutions and the landlords has not been up to the standard that helps us to be able to execute these things. But the big part of it is the instability in the organization that leaves people paralyzed.
Now, what was distressing for parents and guardians, never mind the students themselves, is that their children are out in the streets, right? Absolutely. And who's accountable for potential ramifications? I mean, never mind the levels of stress. There have been conversations that we've had before where, prior to you obviously joining the organization, where students have claimed that they've had to resort to prostitution or other illicit means in order to survive. Now, obviously, these are young men and women that have no accommodation and are literally pushed out onto the streets.
We have to take accountability first as NSFAS because we have to play our part. It's easy to stand on the sideline and point a finger to other parties that may have not played their part. But we need to make sure we receive the information in time. We need to reach out to the institutions in the event we don't have adequate information to process these payments. So primarily, I don't want to point fingers at other parties, and I think that we as an institution should take responsibility for that and make sure that we play our part in resolving this now, but in putting in place processes that will ensure it doesn't happen in the future.
Now, one of the things you mentioned is that certainly we've read about it, that there's been a call to the various service providers to write to you if there are outstanding balances that are due for accommodation. Do you not have a database of these individuals and institutions that are accommodating these students?
We have a database, but we're making the call so that we know exactly how much is outstanding for which service provider. And in some instances, although not very many, you might find that the information we have may have not been complete. In other words, we may be having a certain service provider on our side, thinking that service provider has got 10 students, only to find that there's 15 students in that service provider. So sometimes those anomalies do happen. Hence, we make the call for them to submit the information according to what they have. And then we can verify that, work between ourselves and the institutions to make sure that we've got the right numbers, and then we make the payment.
Do you feel that you have the right people working for NSFAS? And the reason I ask, obviously, is because for the last X number of years, there's been a new administrator, a new chief executive, so that the turnover at the highest echelons of the organization has been high. But what about the rest of the staff that have been managing the processes for many, many years. Are they up to it? Are they up to the task?
I'm just going to use an example of the payments of the allowances to TVET college students. We've had to do that in a very short period of time, and we've had to do that using the employees that are there in the organization now, and they performed. They did make it happen. So it's easy to just blame employees for these things. I think the instability in the organization at leadership level is the bigger contributor. You can see even other organizations in the state that do have that level of instability, they tend not to have efficient processes. So, but also it paralyzes employees. It leaves them directionless. And it creates opportunities for untoward behavior. So employees can do the job. I think they've proved. And we've got to work with them. We've got to obviously make sure that the culture is the right culture. After such instability, the culture does get affected. But I think employees can do the job, and they have proven in this payment for TVET colleges under very tight deadlines.
So how does this not happen again, Freeman? What is it that you're putting in place? Because one would imagine that whether there's instability or not, certain systems have to work. So, for instance, we're between governments at the moment. There's an expectation that those that are receiving their grants at the end of the month will receive their grants because there's systems that are put in place. So let's talk about how you're ensuring that we don't continually have these conversations.
I think that's a broader question that talks to the systemic nature of the state entities that are finding themselves where we are. And I'm saying you just have to look where there has been stability. Where there's been stability, those organizations tend to perform well. Where there has not been stability at leadership level, those organizations have not performed well. If there's a lesson to be learned from these circumstances, is that we need to move to a dispensation where there is that stability, because then it begins to create a better accountability chain, because now if the person has been there for some time, you are able to hold that person accountable. But if you keep changing those people at leadership level, I come in now, I have to sort out the problems that I find there, but you're not going to hold me personally accountable for that. No. But if you create stability, then you are able to hold people accountable. I really think that the bigger contributor, if you can create stability at leadership level, you will gradually resolve a lot of issues. It's not simplifying the matter. You just have to look at other entities that do not have that kind of stability. They tend to have challenges.
So you've been in this position a few months, and obviously, I think a couple more years to go on your term. One would imagine that over the next few months we're likely to see changes that will ensure that the problems that exist do not exist in the future. In previous conversations that I've had with members of the NSFAS team, it's spoken to communication between NSFAS, the various institutions that you support, and the students themselves. And it appears that communication is not existing or is not maximized. Has this changed in your tenure?
I think what needs to change, communication problems are a symptom of a bigger problem, and that problem is a culture problem. If an issue comes through my desk, how do I handle that issue until it's finalized? And if I need information from a university or a TVET college, how do I behave to ensure I get that information? We can say communication is a problem, but do I take the steps to ensure that happens? I think if we can focus on building a culture that is geared towards servicing students, a culture that is geared towards working together, collaborating as an organization together with our partners, I think that will solve the communication problem. Communication on its own would not change unless the culture changes.
Freeman Nomvalo, NSFAS Administrator, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you.